4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, and welcome to yet another edition of J.E.D.I Lunch Break Live. Justice, equity, inclusion. What am I talking about today? I must have been too much turkey from last week. Justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion insights for implementing equity plans. We do this in 15 minutes or less. We just want to give you a little bit of slice of how you can infuse inclusion into your workplace and your workplace practices. I haven't said this for a while, but actually these conversations are great for people at any level in the organization, whether you are a leader who is responsible for greenlighting the plan, whether you are a leader who's responsible for implementing, executing, or overseeing this plan, usually by other diversity, equity, inclusion practitioners or people who are engaged in the strategic planning and direction of the organization. Or if you are, in fact, just in charge of what's happening in your department or division, these tips are great for everyone, because in each of these cycles that we're going through, everybody has a role to play. And so understanding, what that role is and how you can participate is important. And you start by understanding, what the whole process is. So we have been, for the last several weeks, digging in deep on implementing equity plans. As you may know, or if this is your first time, let's do a quick update. There are 4 cycles. I've defined 4 cycles in implementing equity and inclusion plans. These cycles, because they are a cycle, which means they continuously flow at all times in a process. You can enter these cycles at any point, but if you are truly committed to having a sustained impact over time, you will complete the cycle at least once, and I suspect many times, as you continue to rise to meet the moment of what it is to have an inclusive and equitable workplace. So let's talk about those cycles. The cycles include planning, which we've discussed, implementation of that plan, monitoring and evaluation, and the final cycle, sustainability and scalability. We started out talking about these plans looking at first the planning cycle stage, which included things like conducting an equity assessment, making sure that we set objectives and had cognizant of who our stakeholders are, talked about funding and, of course, legal review. We've also spent time talking about the implementation cycle, which included things like leadership and governance, staff training, pilot testing, rollout, and communication. As we are now entering into the second part, or part 2, of our monitoring and evaluation cycle. That cycle, we had our data collection before the Thanksgiving holiday. Today, we're going to talk about feedback loops. And then in future conversations, we'll deal with adjustments that need to be made, being transparent and reporting. And that will conclude our monitoring and evaluation cycle and lead us right into scalability and sustainability, which includes things like documenting best practices, making sure we have ongoing fundraiser, how we being committed to our stakeholder involvement, how do we integrate into our regular programs, and of course, the all-important replication. So lots of good stuff to come, but hey, let's not waste our time. Let's dig into what we're here to talk about today, and that is feedback loops. Okay, so first of all, when we're dealing with feedback, we're really saying that we're going to be intentional about making sure that the folks who are impacted by these plans have an ability to weigh in and give us feedback on how we're doing. Now, first and foremost, understand that feedback is an essential part of inclusion. You cannot implement these things in a singularity. I say it all the time. Justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion is essentially a team sport. Yes, there are things that you should and could do as an individual to show up better as a team player. For instance, if you are a football player, you can't win a game without your team, but you can't be on the team if you haven't done the workouts and gone to the gym and watched the film and done all of those things. It is very similar to that in justice, equity, diversity, inclusion as well. If you want to be good at this, you need to show up ready individually, but also prepared to play as a team. All right, so stakeholders are important. And most of the time, if you're starting here, then you may not have those stakeholders identified yet. But if you have gone through any of our other cycles, such as planning and implementation, then you're going to be carrying through those stakeholders that you've identified and make sure that they are also included in our monitoring and evaluation process as part of this feedback loop. This means not just staff members, but also leadership. You may have champions, and you may even have external partners. The key here is you want to make sure that you're representing all levels of experiences as well as diverse representation when you're looking at your stakeholders. The next thing to consider here is the mechanism of feedback itself. Now, feedback can come in many, many formats. But you ought to be intentional about the ways and this can be both formal and informal. I'm going to speak to you primarily about formal, but you ought to be intentional about the ways in which people can informally share and you are capturing that information. That can be as simple as on the informal side. It could be as simple as asking or noting emails that are sent to you about the process or the pilot program. It can be as simple as asking for people's feedback in a meeting and capturing that and send it. That's going to be more on the informal side. On the formal side, we're looking at looking at various instruments, and those instruments could include things like surveys, focus groups, one-on-one interviews. You can also do some less a step back engagement that looks at things like suggestion box. Remember that old thing? Or a more modern reporting system that allows some anonymity. In most cases, you want to have a couple of different mechanisms of feedback, and I highly recommend that at least one of them allows for some anonymity. Anonymity helps to promote safety around opinions. A lot of staff members, particularly junior staff members, do not feel empowered to have a contrary opinion to what they believe is happening in their workplace. And their biggest fear is retaliation of some sort. If not outright losing their job, then some negative impact to the job that they're holding. And so one way to allow them to be forthright in where they stand is to provide some anonymous feedback loops. Now, one caveat here. Do not hear one negative opinion and think that that opinion speaks for everyone. So it's important to also keep what you're hearing and the feedback that you're receiving in perspective. I'm not saying ignore it. I'm not saying ignore it. I'm going to say that one more time. I'm not saying ignore it. But what I am saying is that you don't want to overall then shift your whole program because you have a few people who have given you some feedback that you perceive to be negative. Instead, think of a holistic way that viewpoint can be somewhat represented and addressed in a way that doesn't cause everyone to have to completely shift gears if you're getting feedback that it's working for some or most. And then I want to get into finally, as we close out on this topic, you want to also be hosting these feedback loops or opportunities for feedback pretty regularly. Now, does that mean every week? No, but it does mean that in addition to thinking about the actual mechanism, you want to think about the timing, and you want to think about having feedback at different intervals throughout the pilot project period. Now, once the pilot project becomes a permanent part of your infrastructure, this is why I always say these cycles will repeat over and over again, then you may start to build in some regular evaluation things that happen on a schedule. But it is important that throughout the pilot project that you're not just waiting to the end to get feedback or only taking feedback at the initial beginning, but that you have strategic points throughout the pilot project that you are recording information. That's part of the regular check-in piece, predefined intervals. And then the other thing that may impact the timing can be triggered by specific events. So there may be specific program items that occur within the pilot project design that trigger an evaluation. So perhaps the launching of something may trigger an evaluation. Perhaps an anniversary of something may trigger an evaluation. You get what I'm saying. The point is that you want to be planned and intentional about instituting these feedback loops. And then finally, I think you want to be thinking about, as part of what you ask in terms of the content of the feedback, you want to think about the content and setting up the mechanisms in a way that they can be scaled. So you don't want to make the feedback loops so demanding and so resource intensive that it's hard to continue to utilize them as the program expands. That's going to be problematic. And then I'm going to close with this just a general overview in terms of approach. First, understand that the feedback will require a response. So be sure to ensure that you're not only that you are able to respond or make adjustments as needed based on the feedback. The second approach piece that I want to share with you is that you want to be keeping your stakeholders and the people from whom you are asking feedback from. You should expect and plan and be clear about when they can expect to hear back from you about the impact of their feedback. You want to keep them informed of the process. And then finally, plan to report. This is one clear way that you can share with keep stakeholders informed, but this is also a way that you can keep the broader community informed and help to ensure that those decision makers are tracking the project right along with you. All right, so that has been Feedback Loops. Next week, we will continue discussing monitoring and evaluation. We're going to get into more detail around adjustments, transparency, and reporting. And then we are moving right into the final of our cycles that we'll discuss, which will be scalability and sustainability. Thank you so much for joining me for another rendition of J.E.D.I Lunch Break Live. We will be back next Thursday. Oh my God, it's December already next week. And so we'll be back live then. Can't wait to see you. In the meantime, you can find all of our content on our YouTube channel or our other social media platforms. So please take a moment to like, subscribe. What else can you do? And follow, like, subscribe, and follow. Do all those things. Thank you. Join me next Thursday for a new edition of J.E.D.I Lunch Break Live right here on LinkedIn.